The great hall of the Galactic Council was filled with the sound of worried voices. Hundreds of alien species had gathered for what many believed would be the most important meeting in 3,000 years. At the center of the room, Ambassador Zethkar of the Krillian Empire stood tall on his 6 legs, his red skin gleaming under the bright lights. Zethkar raised one of his 4 arms for silence. The room slowly grew quiet as all eyes turned to him. His 6 yellow eyes looked around the room with confidence before he began to speak. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Zethkar said, his voice deep and strong. "For too long we have lived under the shadow of human control. They tell us when we can trade, where we can expand, and how we must solve our problems. But I say no more," murmurs spread through the crowd. Some aliens nodded in agreement, while others looked nervous. The humans had kept peace in the galaxy for 3,000 years, but many species had grown tired of following human rules. "The humans have become weak," Zethkar continued. "Look at them now. They spend their days making art, writing books, and growing flowers. When did you last see a human soldier? When did you last hear of human weapons being used? They have forgotten how to fight." Ambassador Velthia of the peaceful Centauri shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She was an old being, old enough to remember stories from before the Great Peace. "Perhaps we should think about this more carefully," she said in her soft voice. "The humans ended the Great War by themselves. Their old records speak of terrible weapons and old stories." Zethkar cut her off with a wave of his hand. "That was 3,000 years ago. The humans who fought that war are long dead. These new humans are different. They are soft and weak. They care more about their gardens than their armies." On the other side of the galaxy, on the blue and green world called Earth, Admiral Jack Morrison was indeed tending to his garden. He knelt among his rose bush, carefully cutting away dead flowers with small scissors. The 73-year-old man hummed quietly to himself as he worked. His gray hair was messy from the morning breeze, and dirt stained his simple clothes. Admiral Morrison had never seen a real battle. He had been born into the long peace, trained in military schools that taught old lessons but never used them. Like most humans of his generation, he spent his time on peaceful activities. He read books, grew plants, and helped manage the colonies that spread across human space. The sound of footsteps on the garden path made him look up. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan approached, carrying a datapad in her hands. She was young, maybe 30 years old, with short brown hair and serious eyes. Like her admiral, she had never seen combat. "Sir," she said, stopping a respectful distance away, "we have received some important news from the Galactic Council." Morrison smiled and set down his cutting tools. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. "What news, Kate? Did someone finally agree to try my wife's apple pie recipe?" Lieutenant Sullivan did not smile. "Sir, the Krillian Empire has declared war on humanity. Their fleets are moving toward the neutral zone. Early reports suggest they have over 12,000 ships." For a moment, Admiral Morrison was quiet. Then, to Lieutenant Sullivan's surprise, he began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle but grew into deep, hearty laughter that made his whole body shake. "Sir?" Lieutenant Sullivan asked, confused. "Did I say something wrong?" Morrison wiped tears from his eyes, still chuckling. 12,000 ships, you said? The entire Krillian battle fleet?" "Yes, sir. Intelligence suggests this is their full military force." Morrison's laughter grew even louder. He sat down on a nearby bench, holding his sides. "Oh, Kate," he said between laughs. "Do you know why we keep all those old buildings locked up? The ones marked historical archives and museum storage?" Lieutenant Sullivan frowned. "I assume they contained old documents and artifacts from the Great War, sir." "Documents," Morrison repeated, grinning widely. "Yes, there are documents. But Kate, tell me something. In all your military training, did you ever wonder why every human child learns combat mathematics along with regular math? Why every colony ship carries equipment that seems too advanced for civilian use? Why every human settlement is built with such thick walls and deep basements?" The young lieutenant thought about this. It was true that human education included many things that seemed unnecessary for a peaceful society. Children learned how to calculate weapon trajectories alongside their geometry lessons. They studied the weak points of various alien species in biology class. Every human knew how to operate heavy machinery, read tactical displays, and follow complex command structures. I thought those were just traditions, sir, remnants from the old days. Morrison stood up, his laughter finally stopping. His eyes, which had seemed kind and grandfatherly moments before, now held something different, something older and harder. Kate, schedule a meeting with the Colonial Defense Council. Tell them we need to discuss reactivation procedures. He paused, looking up at the clear blue sky where ships moved between Earth and its orbital stations. Also, send a message to the Krillians. Tell them we accept their declaration of war. Lieutenant Sullivan stared at her admiral. Sir, shouldn't we try to negotiate? Surely we can solve this without fighting. Morrison picked up his gardening tools and began walking toward his house. Oh, Kate, he said over his shoulder, there won't be any fighting. Not the kind the Krillians expect anyway. He stopped and turned back to her. Also, contact the Museum of Military History. Tell them to prepare for some very special visitors. I think it's time some old friends came out of storage. Back in the Galactic Council chambers, Zethkar was finishing his speech. The Krillian Empire will no longer bow to human weakness. We call upon all free species to join us in throwing off the chains of human control. Together, we will show the galaxy that the age of human dominance is over. Many aliens in the audience were nodding now. The idea of challenging the humans seemed less frightening when Zethkar put it that way. After all, what could a species of gardeners and artists do against the combined might of the galaxy's warrior races? Ambassador Velthia tried once more to speak. But the humans have kept peace for 3,000 years. Perhaps we should ask ourselves why they were able to do that. Because no one challenged them, Zethkar replied confidently. But that changes. Today, within 1 week, Krillian forces will enter human space. We will take their outer colonies first, to show the galaxy that humans can be defeated. Then we will march on Earth itself. The crowd erupted in cheers from some species and worried whispers from others. As the meeting broke up, many aliens left feeling excited about the coming conflict. Finally, someone was brave enough to stand up to the humans, but a few older aliens, those who remembered the stories from before the Great Peace, left the meeting with heavy hearts. They remembered tales of human ships that could destroy planets, of human soldiers who never retreated, of human weapons that could crack moons in half dot. As Ambassador Velthia walked slowly back to her ship, she whispered a prayer to her ancestors. Let the humans be as merciful in war as they have been in peace, she said quietly. Because if they are not, the Krillians have no idea what they have awakened. Far away on Earth, Admiral Morrison was making phone calls to very old friends. Museums were being opened for the first time in centuries. Deep storage facilities were powering up systems that had slept for 3,000 years. And across human space, colonists who had spent their lives as farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers were remembering their other education. The war was about to begin. But as Admiral Morrison had said, it would not be the kind of war the Krillians expected. The news of the Krillian War declaration spread across human space faster than light itself. On every world, in every station, in every colony, humans received the same message at the same time. The reaction was not what any outside observer would have expected on the farming world of New Eden. Ben Carter was driving his harvester through fields of golden wheat when his communication device buzzed. He stopped the massive machine and climbed down to answer the call. His 12-year-old daughter Lucy came running from the farmhouse, her face bright with excitement. "Dad, Dad," she called out, waving her tablet in the air. "The news says aliens want to fight us." "Real aliens, not the friendly ones?" Ben took the tablet and read the official message from Earth Command. The Krillian Empire had declared war on humanity. All colonies were to prepare for possible attack. Citizens should remain calm and follow local emergency procedures. Ben handed the tablet back to his daughter and smiled. Well, Lucy, looks like we're going to have some visitors. Go tell your mother to start cooking the big dinner we'll want. To celebrate properly, Lucy looked confused. Celebrate? But Dad, aren't you scared? The aliens have big ships and weapons. Then laughed and ruffled his daughter's hair. Sweetheart, do you remember what I taught you about the old storage barn? The one with the heavy locks that we never open? You said it had old farming equipment that was too dangerous for children. That's right. Well, I think it's time we opened that barn and showed our visitors what human farming equipment really looks like. Thousands of miles away in the underground. Levels of the Lunar Archives, Dr. Helen Ross was experiencing the most exciting day of her career. As head of the Historical Preservation Department, she had spent years studying old documents and artifacts from the time before the Great Peace. But today, she was being given access to areas that had been sealed for 3,000 years. Professor Ross, called her assistant Ryan Blake from deeper in the archive complex, you need to see this immediately. Helen made her way through corridors lined with massive steel doors. Each door was marked with symbols and codes that few humans alive could read. At the end of the corridor, Ryan stood before an open vault, his face pale with shock. Ryan, what is it? Helen asked as she approached. Professor, the inventory lists? We've been using... They're wrong. Completely wrong. Ryan's voice was shaking. Look at this. Helen stepped into the vault and gasped. Instead of the old documents and museum pieces she expected, the room was filled with sleek, gleaming machines. Rows and rows of them stretched into the darkness, each one perfectly preserved and maintained. These aren't historical artifacts, Helen whispered, walking between the machines. These are fully functional military vehicles. Ryan checked his tablet, scrolling through files that were being unlocked in real time. Professor, according to the new data I'm receiving, there are over 15,000 facilities like this one across human space. Each one maintained by automated systems that have been running continuously for 3,000 years. Helen approached one of the machines and ran her hand along its smooth surface. The metal was warm to the touch, and status lights blinked steadily along its side. This isn't a museum, Ryan. This is an armory. But Professor, why keep all of this secret? Why not tell people about it? Helen smiled sadly. Because, Ryan, sometimes the best way to keep peace is to let everyone forget how good you are at war. On the colony world of Haven's Rest, construction worker Pete Johnson was having a very strange day. He had been building a new school when his work communicator received an unusual message. The sender was listed as Colonial Defense Network, and the message contained only coordinates and a time. Report to Community Center 7 at 1800 hours. Pete had lived on Haven's Rest his entire life. He knew every building, every street, every corner of the settlement. Community Center 7 was where children played games and families held parties. It was the last place he would expect to receive mysterious military messages, but at exactly 1800 hours, Pete stood outside the community center with hundreds of other colonists. There were teachers, shopkeepers, farmers, and mechanics. All of them looked confused and worried. The doors opened. And old Sam walked out. Everyone knew Sam as the settlement's librarian, a quiet man who ran story time for children and helped students with their research. But today, Sam looked different. He stood straighter, his eyes were sharper, and when he spoke, his voice carried authority that hadn't been there during bedtime stories. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd, thank you for coming. I know you're confused, but everything will be explained shortly. Please follow me inside. The colonists filed into the community center, but instead of the usual meeting room, they found themselves in a large elevator. The elevator descended for what felt like minutes, going much deeper than any building on Haven's Rest should go. When the doors opened, Pete's jaw dropped. They were standing in a vast underground hangar filled with starships. Not the simple transport ships that carried supplies between colonies, but sleek, dangerous-looking vessels that hummed with barely contained power. Welcome, Sam said, to Haven's Rest Naval Station. I believe it's time you all remembered your other jobs. A woman near Pete raised her hand. Sam, what's going on? We're just colonists. We build things and grow food. Sam smiled, but it was a different smile than the one he wore in the library. Maria, you're a construction engineer, yes? Tell me, what did you think about the building techniques you learned in school? Did it ever seem like the foundations you were taught to build were too strong for simple civilian structures? Maria frowned, thinking, well, yes. We always over-engineered everything. Built things that could withstand impacts that would never happen in normal life. And you, Pete, Sam continued, turning to the construction worker. You've always wondered why every colonist learns to operate heavy machinery that seems too advanced for civilian use, haven't you? Pete nodded slowly. It was true. Every human child learned to operate equipment that seemed designed for military purposes. They learned to read tactical displays, follow complex command structures, and repair systems under pressure. The truth is, Sam said, every human colony is both a civilian settlement and a military base. Every colonist is both a citizen and a soldier. We've been at peace for 3,000 years not because we forgot how to fight, but because we never stopped being ready to. The crowd was silent, processing this information. Sam continued, the Krillian Empire has declared war on humanity. In the next few days, they will attack our outer colonies, expecting to find defenseless farmers and researchers. Instead, they will find something they never expected. Sam walked to a control panel and pressed a series of buttons. Throughout the hangar, the starships began to power up. Lights flickered on, engines hummed to life, and weapon systems ran diagnostic checks. Each of you has been trained for this moment since childhood, Sam said. You may not have realized it, but every lesson you learned, every skill you developed, every job you performed was preparing you for the day when humanity would need to defend itself again. Pete looked around at his neighbors with new eyes. The schoolteacher who had taught his children was checking the weapon systems on a fighter craft. The shopkeeper who sold him groceries was reviewing tactical displays. The farmer who grew their food was examining what looked like a very advanced piece of military equipment. But why keep it secret? Asked Maria. Why not tell us? Sam's expression grew thoughtful. Because, Maria, the best way to maintain peace is to let potential enemies think you're not a threat. For 3,000 years, the galaxy has seen us as peaceful gardeners and artists. They never suspected that every garden could become a fortress. Every artist could become a soldier, and every colony could become a battleground. The hangar was now fully active. Hundreds of starships were ready for launch, their crews colonists who had been living normal lives, just hours before taking their positions with surprising efficiency. The Krillians think they're attacking a peaceful farming community, Sam said with a grin that would have surprised the children who knew him as the friendly librarian. They're about to learn that human farmers are very good at growing things, including victory. As the first ships began to launch from the hidden hangar, Pete realized that his quiet life as a construction worker was about to become much more interesting. Across human space, similar scenes were playing out. Farmers were revealing weapon systems hidden in their barns. Teachers were opening military supply caches hidden in their schools. Shopkeepers were activating defense. Networks concealed in their stores. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's 3,000 years of peace had not made them weak. It had made them patient. And now, their patience was about to pay off in ways the Krillians could never imagine. Commander Velter of the Krillian Navy felt confident as his scout fleet approached the outer edge of human space. His 50 ships were the pride of the Krillian military, equipped with the latest weapons and shields. Intelligence reports had told him to expect weak resistance from the human colonies. Sensor officer, Velter called from his command chair. What do you see at the target colony? The young officer at the sensor station looked confused. Sir, I'm reading some unusual activity on the planet's surface. The settlement appears to be changing, Velter frowned. Changing how? The farming domes are retracting into the ground, sir, and there are new structures rising up to replace them. On the main screen, the peaceful farming colony of New Frontier was transforming before their eyes. What had looked like simple agricultural buildings were folding away like flower petals closing. In their place, large metal structures emerged from hidden underground chambers. "Sir," the weapons officer called out, his voice tight with concern, "I'm detecting massive energy readings from the planet's surface. Those new structures appear to be weapons platforms." Velter stood up from his chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. "That's impossible. Our intelligence reports showed no military installations." "Sir, incoming transmission from the planet," the communications officer announced. "Put it on screen," Velter ordered. The view screen flickered, showing a human male in simple farming clothes. He stood in what appeared to be a control room filled with advanced military equipment. Behind him, technicians in civilian clothing operated complex weapon systems with practiced ease. "Greetings, Krillian forces," the man said with a warm smile. "I'm Mayor Chris Nelson of New Frontier. We've been expecting you," Velter found his voice. "You're supposed to be farmers." Mayor Nelson's smile widened. "Oh, we are farmers, Commander. We grow many things here: wheat, corn, vegetables." He paused, and his smile became something more dangerous. "And we're about to grow you a very important lesson about human hospitality." The transmission ended, and Velter's tactical officer shouted in alarm, "Sir, massive energy buildup from multiple points on the planet's surface." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The planet's surface lit up like a star as dozens of hidden weapon platforms fired in perfect coordination. The energy beams were so bright they could be seen from space, cutting through Velter's fleet like a hot knife through butter dot in 37 seconds. 50 Krillian warships simply ceased to exist. Only Velter's command ship survived, and only because he had been positioned at the very edge of the formation. His ship was heavily damaged, systems failing, hull breached in multiple places. "Damage report," Velter gasped, pulling himself up from where the blast had thrown him. "Sir, we've lost all weapons, shields are down to 8%, and life support is failing," his engineer reported. "We need to evacuate immediately." As Velter and his surviving crew members climbed into escape pods, he sent an emergency message. "Back to Krillian High Command. Fleet destroyed. Human colonies are not what they appear to be. Recommend immediate withdrawal of all forces." 3 hours later, the second wave of Krillian ships arrived at the colony of Riverside Station. Fleet Captain Zorak commanded 500 vessels, the largest single battle group in Krillian history. He had received Velter's message but dismissed it as the ravings of a defeated commander. "All ships, prepare for planetary bombardment," Zorak ordered. "We'll destroy this colony from orbit before they can use whatever trick they pulled on the First Fleet." But as his ships moved into attack formation, something impossible appeared on his sensors. Rising from the planet's surface was what looked like a single, massive weapon barrel. It was so large that it dwarfed his biggest battleships. "Sir," his science officer said in a voice filled with fear, "that appears to be some kind of planetary cannon. The energy readings are off the scale." Zorak laughed, though it sounded forced. "One weapon against 500 ships? They must be desperate." The planetary cannon fired once. A single beam of energy, wider than a city block, reached out from the planet's surface and swept across Zorak's entire fleet. Ships that had taken years to build and represented the finest technology in the Krillian Empire were vaporized instantly. The beam was so powerful that it carved through 500 warships as if they were made of paper. Zorak's flagship was destroyed so quickly that he didn't even have time to send a final message back on the Krillian homeworld. Fleet Admiral Korath paced his command center like a caged animal. In 6 hours, he had lost over 1,000 ships without inflicting a single casualty on the humans. The reports coming in from the front lines were impossible to believe. "Sir," his aide said nervously, "we're receiving surrender offers from 6 of our client species. They're asking to withdraw from the Alliance." "Cowards," Korath snarled. "Send the third wave." 2,000 ships this time? "Sir, perhaps we should reconsider," suggested General Yazek carefully. "The humans are clearly more prepared than our intelligence indicated." "No," Korath roared. "The humans got lucky twice. 2,000 ships will overwhelm whatever defenses they have." But even as he gave the order, Korath felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. How had human intelligence been so wrong? How had an entire galaxy been fooled for 3,000 years? On Earth, Admiral Morrison was sitting in his study, reading reports from the front lines. Each battle summary was brief and to the point. Krillian fleet engaged, enemy destroyed, no human casualties. He chuckled as he read each one. Lieutenant Sullivan entered the room carrying another stack of reports. Sir, the third Krillian wave has been destroyed at the colony of Peaceful Valley. The colonists used something called a mass driver array, hidden under their wheat fields. Morrison nodded approvingly. The old mass drivers. I remember when we built those. The engineering team said they were too powerful for planetary defense. He smiled. I told them there's no such thing as too powerful when it comes to protecting your home. Sir, we're also receiving communications from across the galaxy. Many species are asking about the true extent of human military capabilities. Morrison set down his reports and looked thoughtful. Kate, do you know why we really maintained peace for 3,000 years? Because we were the strongest military force in the galaxy, sir. Partly, Morrison said. But the real reason is that we discovered something interesting after the Great War. Conquering is easy, destroying is simple. But building something that lasts? Creating a galaxy where billions of beings can live and work together? That's hard work. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of the city below. We could have ruled the galaxy through fear, Kate. We could have set ourselves up as emperors and forced everyone to obey us, but that would have been boring. Boring. Sir? Morrison turned back to her with a grin. Kate, imagine you're the strongest person in your neighborhood. You could go around beating up everyone, taking whatever you want, making everyone afraid of you. But how long before that gets old? How long before you realize that being feared isn't the same as being respected? Lieutenant Sullivan began to understand. So instead you become the protector. You keep the peace, help solve problems, and only show your strength when necessary. Exactly, Morrison said. For 3,000 years we've been the galaxies. Peacekeepers not because we're peaceful by nature, but because we're so good at war that everyone else prefers peace. His communication device buzzed with an incoming message. Morrison read it and started laughing again. What is it, sir? Intelligence report from the Krillian homeworld, Morrison said, wiping tears from his eyes. Fleet Admiral Korath has been quietly removed from command. The new Krillian leadership is already sending diplomatic messages asking for peace talks. Will we accept, sir? Morrison's expression grew thoughtful. Of course we'll accept, Kate. That's what we do. We give everyone a chance to choose peace. Over conflict, he paused, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Though I suspect the Krillians will be much more polite in their future diplomatic communications. Across the galaxy, the news of the brief conflict was spreading. Species that had been quietly complaining about human peacekeeping were suddenly expressing renewed appreciation for human protection. Several minor wars that had been brewing for decades were being resolved through hasty diplomatic negotiations. The Meridian trade dispute, which had dragged on for 50 years, was settled in a single day when both sides agreed to human arbitration. The border conflict between the Tau systems and the Vegan Republic ended when both sides realized they would rather negotiate than risk attracting human attention. As Lieutenant Sullivan prepared to leave, she turned back to Admiral Morrison. Sir, one more question. How long have you been planning for something like this? Morrison smiled and returned to his reports. Kate, we weren't planning for this specific conflict. We've been planning for every possible conflict for 3,000 years. The Krillians just happened to be the ones who reminded the galaxy why that was a good idea. Outside, the lights of human civilization twinkled peacefully in the night, just as they had for 3 millennia. But now the galaxy understood that this peace was not a sign of weakness. Fleet Admiral Korath stood before the assembled Krillian War Council, his once proud posture now bent with shame and fear. In the past week, they had lost over 3,000 ships without killing a single human. The reports coming in from the front lines were getting worse each day. Perhaps, suggested General Yazik carefully, We should ask ourselves why the humans have been able to keep peace for 3,000 years. Because they were weak, Korath insisted, but his voice shook as he spoke. They had to be weak. No species can remain strong without regular warfare. Or, came a calm voice from the chamber entrance, because they were bored. Every head in the room turned to see something impossible. A human stood in the doorway of the most secure military facility in the Krillian Empire. He was average height, middle-aged, wearing simple civilian clothes that looked like they belonged on a teacher or shopkeeper. But somehow, he had walked through dozens of security checkpoints and past hundreds of guards as if the doors had simply opened for him. "Allow me to introduce myself," the man said pleasantly, walking into the center of the room as if he owned it. "I'm Professor Dunn Murphy, Dean of Cultural Studies at Earth University. I've come to give you a history lesson." Korath's guards moved to surround the human, but Professor Murphy raised one hand. "I wouldn't recommend that, Admiral. My ride is parked just outside, and my pilot gets nervous when people point weapons at me." As if responding to his words, every screen in the chamber activated. They showed the view from space above the Krillian homeworld. Where empty space had been moments before, a single human ship now hung in orbit. It was bigger than anything the Krillians had ever built. Bigger than their largest battleships, bigger than their space stations, bigger than their orbital cities. "That," Professor Murphy said conversationally, "is the UHS Peaceful Resolution? She's been watching your planet for about 6 months now, studying your culture and technology. Beautiful world you have here, by the way. Excellent mineral deposits." General Yazik found his voice first. 6 months? Our sensors detected nothing. Professor Murphy smiled like a teacher pleased with a student's question. "That's exactly the point, General. Now, shall we discuss why humanity has been peaceful for 3,000 years? He gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the room. The display showed images of human worlds, but not the peaceful farming communities and research stations the Krillians had expected. Instead, they saw massive industrial complexes, training facilities, and construction yards that had been hidden beneath false surfaces. "You see," Professor Murphy explained, "after the Great War, we discovered something interesting. Fighting is easy. Winning is simple. Any species with enough weapons can conquer their neighbors, but creating a peace that lasts for thousands of years, that requires real skill." The display changed to show human colonies in cross-section, revealing the truth beneath their peaceful exteriors. Every farming dome had weapon systems. Every research station had military equipment. Every civilian transport could become a warship in minutes. "Every human world is a fortress," Professor Murphy continued, noting the growing horror on the alien faces around him. "Every human civilian is a trained soldier. Every human ship can become a warship with about 20 minutes of preparation time." He paused, watching their reactions. "But we found that ruling the galaxy through force was rather boring after the first few centuries." Commander Velter, who had survived the destruction of his fleet in an escape pod, spoke up weakly. "If you have such power, why hide it? Why pretend to be peaceful?" Professor Murphy's expression grew fond, like a grandfather explaining something to a confused child. "Because, Commander, we learned that the best way to keep peace is to make war seem like a very bad idea. For 3,000 years, potential enemies have looked at us and seen gardeners, artists, and philosophers. They never suspected that every gardener knows how to grow explosives, every artist can design weapons, and every philosopher has studied the art of war." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of air circulation systems. The Krillian leaders stared at the human professor, beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. "Now," Professor Murphy continued, "I'm here to offer you a choice. You have 3 options available." He gestured again, and the display showed the current positions of Krillian forces throughout the galaxy. Red dots marked their military bases, their supply lines, their command centers. Option 1. Continue your current course of action. Try to fight humanity with everything you have. The display began showing simulated battle outcomes. Every scenario ended with complete Krillian defeat. Within 72 hours, every Krillian military asset will be destroyed. Your leadership will be replaced with individuals who better understand the value of cooperation. Your species will spend the next few centuries under human supervision while you learn to coexist peacefully with your neighbors. The Krillian leaders exchanged worried looks. The simulations were detailed and terrifyingly realistic. Option 2? Professor Murphy said, and the display changed to show diplomatic scenarios. Withdraw your forces immediately, issue a formal apology to the Galactic Council, and we'll pretend this misunderstanding never happened. You can even keep your dignity. We'll make it look like you came to your senses rather than admitting you made a serious error in judgment. Fleet Admiral Korath straightened, some of his old pride returning. And if we refuse both options, what is your third choice? Professor Murphy's smile never wavered, but something in his eyes changed. For just a moment, the kindly academic mask slipped away, revealing something far older and infinitely more dangerous. In that instant, every Krillian in the room understood why humanity had been able to keep peace for 3 millennia. Well, Professor Murphy said softly, then we implement option 3. And Admiral, you really don't want to see option 3. The display changed one final time, showing what looked like historical footage. Massive human fleets moving through space like living things, planets being rebuilt from nothing, entire star systems being moved into new positions. Technology so advanced it seemed like magic. This is what we did during the Great War, Professor Murphy explained. Not to conquer, but to end the conflict that was tearing the galaxy apart. We could do it again, but it would be messy. We prefer our current approach. General Yazik leaned forward. Professor, may I ask a question? Of course, General. How many times has this happened before? How many species have tried to challenge humanity? Professor Murphy chuckled. In 3,000 years, you're not even in the top 50. Most species are smarter than this. They look at human peacekeeping efforts and think these beings must be very confident to act so calmly. They assume, correctly, that we have good reasons for our confidence. He gestured toward the massive ship still visible on the screens above them. The peaceful resolution is just one of thousands of ships we keep ready for situations like this. Most of the time, we never need to use them. The galaxy stays peaceful because most species prefer cooperation to extinction. Admiral Korath slumped in his chair. We thought you had grown weak. A common mistake, Professor Murphy agreed. You saw 3,000 years of peace and assumed we had forgotten how to fight. You never considered that we might have become so good at fighting that no one wanted to test us. The professor walked closer to the Krillian leaders, his voice becoming gentler. Admiral, let me share something with you. Do you know what the hardest part of keeping galactic peace really is? Korath shook his head. Restraint, Professor Murphy said simply. Having the power to solve every problem with force, but choosing not to. Having weapons that could reshape the galaxy, but using them only when absolutely necessary. That's the real challenge, he turned to address the entire council. You have until tomorrow to make your decision. Choose option 1, and you'll learn why the Great War ended so quickly. Choose option 2, and this becomes a minor diplomatic incident that everyone will forget in a few years. But choose wisely, because once you pick option 3, there's no going back. Professor Murphy walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Admiral? Next time you want to study human military capabilities, try asking politely. We give excellent tours of our museums, much safer than starting a war. As the human professor left the chamber, the Krillian leaders sat in stunned silence. Outside, the massive human ship continued its silent orbit, a reminder of the power they had chosen to challenge. Within an hour, Admiral Korath was sending messages to all Krillian forces. The order was simple: withdraw immediately and prepare for peace negotiations. The war was over before it had truly begun, ended not by massive battles or heroic sacrifices, but by a single professor giving a history lesson to beings who had forgotten that true strength often wears the mask of kindness. The evacuation of Krillian forces from human space proceeded with remarkable speed. Within 1 week, 12,000 warships were retreating toward their home territory. their commanders sending increasingly desperate messages to explain their actions to their political leaders. On Earth, the celebration was quiet but genuine. In a small coffee shop in Geneva, Professor Murphy sat across from Admiral Morrison, both men enjoying their morning drinks and watching the news coverage. "I have to admit," Admiral Morrison said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, "I was looking forward to a real challenge. It's been a while since we've had proper excitement." Professor Murphy chuckled. "Jack, you say that every time. Remember the hegemony crisis 800 years ago? You complained then too." "That barely lasted 3 days," Admiral Morrison protested. "At least this time we got to show off some of the newer equipment." On the television screen, a news reporter was interviewing Dr. Helen Ross outside the Lunar Archives. "Professor Ross, can you explain to our viewers exactly what humanity has been doing for the past 3,000 years? Dr. Ross smiled warmly at the camera. "Well, Susan, imagine you're the strongest person in your neighborhood. You could go around picking fights, taking what you want, making everyone afraid of you. But that gets old quickly. So instead you become the neighborhood protector. You keep the peace, help solve problems, and occasionally remind everyone why peace is better than the alternative." "But surely the Krillians must have known about humanity's military history." "That's the interesting part," Dr. Ross replied. "They knew about the Great War, but they made a common mistake. They assumed that a species couldn't stay militarily ready without regular fighting. It's something we see often with younger civilizations." Back in the coffee shop, Professor Murphy's communication device buzzed softly. He glanced at the message and began laughing out loud. "What is it?" Admiral Morrison asked. "Intelligence report from our embassy on the Krillian homeworld," Professor Murphy said, wiping his eyes. "Fleet Admiral Korath has been quietly reassigned to waste management duties. The new leadership is already reaching out through diplomatic channels, offering gifts and requesting formal peace treaties." Admiral Morrison shook his head, grinning. "Gifts, as if we need anything they have?" "Well," Professor Murphy said, "I did mention to their cultural attach that we're always interested in new art forms and recipes. Nothing says, 'Sorry, we tried to conquer you,' like a good cookbook exchange program." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Sullivan, who approached their table with barely contained excitement. "Admiral, Professor, you need to see this," she said, activating a portable display device. "We've been monitoring communications across the galaxy. The reaction to recent events has been very interesting." The display showed message traffic between various alien civilizations, all discussing the brief Krillian-human conflict. Species that had been quietly complaining about human peacekeeping efforts were suddenly expressing renewed appreciation for human protection. Several minor conflicts that had been brewing for decades were being resolved through hasty diplomatic negotiations. "Look at the Meridian trade dispute," Lieutenant Sullivan pointed out. "They've been fighting over those shipping routes for 50 years. As of this morning, they've agreed to human arbitration." Admiral Morrison raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "Nothing like a good demonstration to remind everyone why diplomacy is better than the alternative." Professor Murphy pulled up another screen, this one showing footage from the Galactic Council chambers. Ambassador Chenwei was addressing the assembly with characteristic human understatement. "The recent disagreement with the Krillian Empire has been resolved," she was saying. "Humanity appreciates the patience and understanding shown by our galactic neighbors during this brief period of educational outreach." Professor Murphy muted the feed and turned to his companions. "You know what the best part is? In 100 years, the younger Krillian generation will probably remember this as the time their ancestors wisely chose peace over conflict. They'll turn it into a founding myth about their species' wisdom and good judgment. And we'll let them, Admiral," Morrison added. "After all, everyone needs to save face." Lieutenant Sullivan looked between the two older men. "Sir, can I ask something that's been bothering me? If we've been maintaining all these military capabilities for 3,000 years, who's been paying for it all? The economics alone must be staggering." Professor Murphy and Admiral Morrison exchanged amused glances. "Kate," Admiral Morrison said gently. "What do you think we've been doing with all that industrial capacity? All those mining operations? All those research stations?" He gestured toward the window, where the lights of orbital facilities twinkled in the sky. "Humanity hasn't been at peace for 3,000 years because we became pacifists. We've been at peace because we became so good at war that no one else wanted to play." Professor Murphy leaned back in his chair, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "The galaxy's greatest joke is that they think we're peacekeepers because we're peaceful. The truth is we're peaceful because we're the best peacekeepers the galaxy has ever seen." Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. On Haven's Rest, old Sam was back to reading stories to children, but now the children asked different questions. "Mr. Sam," asked a little girl named Emma, "are you really a soldier?" Sam smiled his gentle librarian smile. "Well, Emma, I suppose we're all soldiers when we need to be. But most of the time, I prefer being a librarian. Stories are much more interesting than battles." On New Frontier, Mayor Chris Nelson was back to tending his crops, but reporters from across the galaxy were asking to interview him. "Mayor Nelson," asked a journalist from the Centauri News Network, "how does it feel to have defeated an entire Krillian fleet?" Chris shrugged, pulling weeds from between his corn rows. "Well, ma'am, farming teaches you a lot about dealing with pests. Sometimes you use gentle methods. Sometimes you need stronger approaches. The Krillians were just a bigger pest than usual." Back on the Krillian homeworld, the new government was working hard to repair their relationship with humanity. The new Fleet Admiral, a cautious female named Sathara, was studying every available record of human military capabilities. "How did our intelligence get it so wrong?" she asked her aide. "Ma'am, I think the problem was that we looked at what humans do during peacetime and assumed that was all they could do. We never considered that they might be choosing not to show their true capabilities." Admiral Sathara nodded thoughtfully. "So when they maintain peace through diplomacy and mediation, it's not because they can't enforce it through strength." "No. From what we've learned, it's because they don't need to. Everyone knows they could if they wanted to." On Earth, as the news cycle began to move on to other stories, Admiral Morrison returned to his garden. He knelt among his roses, carefully tending to each plant. Lieutenant Sullivan found him there as the sun was setting. "Sir, final reports are in. All Krillian forces have withdrawn from human space. The Galactic Council has formally accepted. Their apology and normal diplomatic relations are being restored." Admiral Morrison nodded, not looking up from his roses. "Good. Kate, do you know why I really enjoy gardening?" "No, sir." "Because," Admiral Morrison said, carefully cutting away a dead bloom, "gardens teach you patience. You plant seeds, you water them, you tend them carefully, and eventually they grow into something beautiful. But if you try to rush the process, if you're too aggressive, you'll destroy what you're trying to create." He stood up, brushing dirt from his knees, and looked out over his garden. "That's what we've been doing for 3,000 years, Kate, tending the galaxy like a garden. Most of the time, gentle care is all that's needed. But occasionally you have to deal with weeds." Lieutenant Sullivan smiled. "And the Krillians were weeds?" The Krillians were weeds," Admiral Morrison confirmed. "But now they've been properly educated about their place in the garden." As night fell over Earth, the lights of human civilization twinkled peacefully in the darkness. Across the galaxy, billions of beings went to sleep knowing that humanity was watching over them, protecting them, keeping the peace. The galaxy had been reminded of an important lesson, that true strength lies not in the willingness to fight, but in the wisdom to know when fighting is unnecessary. And humanity, having spent 3,000 years perfecting that wisdom, would continue to tend their galactic garden with the patient skill of beings who understood that the best victories are the ones that never need to be fought, but they would always be ready, just in case someone forgot the lesson. After all, as humanity had learned long ago, the best way to keep peace was to be very, very good at war.